Hello again. Reading chapter 6 of Santa and Pete. When Grandpa arrived at my stop Christmas Eve morning, he had decorated his bus. A pine wreath with large red bows sprouted from the front bumper, and inside along the windows hung waves of friggy gold garland. When I ran up the steps, he gave me a big smile. A tiny red and green candy cane. I gave him a kiss. Right away, I noticed something was different. He passed a newspaper article on the narrow, see-through wall behind his seat. The Amsterdam News had featured him a couple of days before in a long article, and they run his picture to boot. Famous Harlem photographer James van der Zee had taken the shot. The headline read, "Journey to the Past for only 15 cents. That's pretty cool, Grandpa admired the picture of him looking back like a sank of a bird. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, I'm sorry. As he climbed the steps of his own bus. That's sure a nice picture of you. How about we drive to the past and see if we run into Santa and Pete? Grab a seat, son, he said, pointing with his chin to my usual spot near the door. I settled there, fumbling with a new yo-yo, grabbing a few more toys from my pocket. As I put off my coat, the yo-yo fell, and I lunged for it. Got to sit down, son, he warned me again. If I stop short, you might go flying through the window. Who do you think you are? Rudy the red-nosed reindeer? Then he winked at me. I giggled. Although with those antlers on your head, he added, you might go pass for Rudy. It's Rudolph, Grandpa, I said, feeling around my head for any signs of reindeerdom. But coming up empty-handed, Mr. Levison gumbled a brief hello as he got on, but Rachel boarded with a cheery, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah. Mr. Man and Terry's, she brought Grandpa a tin of something wrapped in a big red bow. Mrs. McLeod came bringing a gift as well. She stepped up as if she had springs in her shoes and deposited her fare in the box. She set a shopping bag near Grandpa's seat as he put off from the curb. Brought you something I made, she said, her voice a hair above a whisper, as if it were a secret between her and him. Today's hat was yellow and satiny, with a shell-shaped yellow netting over her eyes. She looked as usual as she had a fancy party to attend. The open shopping bag sent a warm, sweet aroma my way. I imagined it was a cake or a batch of butter cookies. As co-pilot, I thought I should have the first crack at the goods, but counted cards instead. Grandpa thanked Rachel and Mrs. McLeod, placing Rachel's tan in the shopping bag. After we picked up the regulars who were all bought gifts, a big smile spread across Grandpa's face. Today you got a special treat coming, he said. Today I'm going to tell you the story of Santa and Pete. It's a Christmas Eve story, Ma said, understanding. I tried to tell it every Christmas Eve. Well, how come I haven't heard it before, he asked. Couldn't do it for a few years. Before that, you were too young. I sat there ready for the story to begin. At the next stop, though, which was near Macy's, so many people got on. Not only people, but also their packages and their groceries and their gifts, that I couldn't see my grandfather anymore, let alone hear any story he might tell. You would think that I loved waiting till the last minute to shop, a woman with pearl drop earrings and a hairy bear of a coat complained as she squeezed her way onto the bus. It seems I'll never learn. At every stop, more last-minute shoppers packed themselves in. One lady's humongous purse kept swinging and nickering my ear. Then when I moved my head, she took up that space, too. My grandfather seemed to be batting 1,000, though. By now, 2 filled shopping bags rested beside his firebox. Talk about a basket catch, except that a shadow had begun to move in over the bus as the sky turned a steely gray. Outside, a wintry frost pulsed from the noses of people walking down the street. Looks like the first snow of winter, someone said, as the flakes began to fall. Not those little nothing flakes that hit the ground and died, but the big flakes as large as silver dollars. So big, in fact, that I imagine that God held up a blanket in the sky until he gathered all the snow in heaven, then yanked the blanket away. That's how quickly it came down. Gobs and gobs of snow, gushing from the clouds, perfect for a snowball fight. And had I been able to get to it. Instead, I pressed my face to the window, trying to see if God would answer my humble prayer to make a blanket of snow on the earth that would last until I got home. I thought all the irregulars would be off the bus by the time we reached Battery Park, but they all stayed. I'm not going out in that weather, said Maya. I'd be Maya, said Maya. I think it's Maya. Might as well head home, Mr. Levison agreed. So after what had seemed like an eternity of the bus inching downtown in the snarled holiday traffic, we finally turned around and headed back toward Harlem, which stretched roughly from 110th to 155th Street, and from river to river. Suddenly the bus coughed, then it sneezed, and finally stopped. "Oh no," grumbled Professor DeFreeze. "I don't believe this," said Mrs. McCloud. No one looked happy. Grandpa tried everything that he could think of inside the bus and out to get it moving. Then I heard his sign of defeat, followed by a growling, "Dog nabbit." Okay, let's go ahead and read chapter 7 too. All around us, people abandoned their cars and trucks and taxis, turning the street into a parking lot. The blizzard had struck fast and fierce, and now not a soul could see to drive, even if they could cut through the snow. "No chains on the bus," Grandpa announced, sounding aggravated, "so we won't be moving anywhere for a while." A number of people asked to be laid off. A second wave followed. Some said they wanted to try the subway, only a few blocks away. And soon, only about 15 people remained on the bus. "Sorry, folks," my grandfather said, rising from his seat. "I have to shut everything off. I'll run the heat for a few minutes here and there, but I don't want to poison you folks, and I don't want to burn out the engine." When he turned off the lights, I grimaced. The charcoal gray sky gripped the shoulders of the bus with the might of a giant. It was getting dark too fast, and now there was no lights outside. Both the street lamps and the store lights had abruptly gone out. Grandpa guessed that the storm had triggered a power outage. I played tricks with my mind, trying to shake off my paralyzing fear of bats, vampires, and other creatures who come out to feed at night. I imagined peeking into a department store windows on 5th Avenue, dazzling holiday displays with their streams of lights, cheery Christmas carols, and animated puppets. I envisioned the brilliant bulbs spiraling up our Christmas tree back home, and the shine of my mother's eyes when my father played My Funny Valentine, especially for her. Bright thoughts comforted me. Outside, the city became a hush. People crept forward at a 45-degree angle and through the bitter wind and blowing snow. I was glad not to be out there with them, even as several more passengers formed a third wave of people who decided to leave the bus and go it alone. Now only the regulars remained. My grandfather went out to make an SOS calls on one of the corner emergency transit telephones. 20 minutes later, he returned, shivering and batting snow from his self. Then rubbing his gloved hands together. Finally, clapping them a couple of times to generate heat. Still sitting some. "Well," he said, pulling his hat off and snapping it against his thigh. "They know we're here." Steam escaped from the silver waves on his head. He stood there next to his firebox for a minute. Then he grabbed one of the Gilfield shopping bags and came over and sat beside me. With the bag near his right foot, he put out a 10. "Might as well get to know each other a little better," he said, "especially since I'm sharing my cookies with you." A few of us chuckled as he passed the open tin around. "I never seen that kind of cookie before. They were rolled with red jam in folds." "I made those," Rachel announced, taking two. "What do you call them?" I asked. "Ruglet," she said. I think I pronounced that right. No idea. Sorry if I didn't. My grandfather took a bite of one and said, thank you, Rachel." Grandpa began the introductions. "Some of you don't even know my first name," he said. "Funny enough, it's Nicholas. Nicholas Mann. Next month, it'll be 25 years I've been driving this bus. My wife always used to say that I talk better than I drive." He twisted his thick gold wedding band a half-turn on his finger. "You know the bit about me being a history buff, but I'm pretty decent at fixing up old houses, too." Grandpa nudged me. "I'm Terrence," I told them, "and I like the Yankees, flying kites, and comic books about Martians, especially when the Martians win." Aside from the feeding the birds, Wonder Bread, Maya Quick said that her acting workshop, they always picked her to play the grandmother, even though I'm far too young for those parts. Professor Anne DeFries taught history at City College and often traveled to places that had mountains she could climb. Albert Levi's son, a tailor, smiled with pride as he said he could tell what size you were just by looking at you. And his granddaughter, Rachel Levi's son, collected angelfish and paper dolls. Mrs. Allison Pearl McLeod talked a good while. She owned a hat shop, was a faithful member of the Ascension Baptist Church, had been married to a wonderful man named William Aker McLeod until he passed. God rest his soul 2 years ago. As Mrs. McLeod finished up, I climbed into my grandfather's lap to stay warm. "Need those antlers adjusted, do you?" he asked. I leaned back against his chest as he rested his fist on my head, lightly twisting and turning them until he finally said, "There you go, son." "You didn't tell us about Santa Pete yet," I complained, glad not to have all those people crowding the space between us. "Santa Pete," Grandpa said, his voice looming over us, as if he wanted people all the way in the next century to hear him. Now those two lived a long time ago, in a way live still. And in a way live, it should be still live, shouldn't it? Instead of live still. "Guess I might as well put this to a good use," Professor DeFries mumbled, pulling a red candlestick and a golden holder from her shopping bag and lighting the wick. She let drops of the wax drip into the holder to form a seal between it and the candle. I took a bite of a cookie as Grandpa opened his thermos and poured a cup of coffee into the black cup. He offered some to everyone, but no one took him up on it except me. Unlike my parents, he let me have a big gulp, which went straight to my head and tap danced on my brain. "You want to hear about Santa Pete, do you?" His eyes scanned us all to see if anyone beside me and Rachel were truly interested. "Looks like we got some time," said Ma. "Maybe I'll not agree, Mr. Lewison." The soft beam from the flame gave all of our faces a gentle glow. Now all eyes were on Grandpa, who had made a little tickle in his throat. He seemed to feel every eye on him, the famous storyteller featured in the Amsterdam News. Then he was off. His words lifted us up and carried us back to the time when Santa Pete touched the world. Back tomorrow for some more chapters. Bye.